Begin with the chapter of Tehillim, Parakuf Chaf Aleph. If you wish, you could stand. Shir LaMa'alos, Esaynai Lehorim, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri. Ezri Mi'Adonai, Yosei Shomayim V'aretz. Al yitein lamot reglecha, al yanum shomrecha. Hinei lo yanum v'lo yishan, shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha al yad yeminecha. Yomam Hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach ba'alayla. Adonai yishmorcha mikol ra, yishmor es nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzeisecha v'echa me'ata v'ad olam. Everybody's welcome to take a seat. I became quite acquainted with the Jacobson family well before Howie and Elaine moved to Silver Spring close to 10 years ago. As a young 17 or 18-year-old counselor in Camp Stay Chemed in Israel, I got to know young, rambunctious Dovi Jacobson. He's not young and rambunctious anymore. And as I got a little bit older, as a somewhat of a counselor on NCSY Kollel in Efrat in the United States, I got to know Rabbi Dr. Dan Jacobson, who was an older mentor. And as Providence would have it, I didn't yet to know Mike or Joel, but it was such a special min hashamayim to get to know Howie and to get to know Elaine so well when they moved here to Silver Spring close to 10 years ago. And Howie and Elaine became such powerful, strong, important members of our shul, of our community, and they continue to, until unfortunately Howie started to get sick several years ago, and as things declined, it became more and more difficult for him to come to shul, but he always wanted to be here, tried to be here, and Elaine would do everything and anything possible to make sure that Harry could be here because it was so important for him to be here. I'd like to share just a brief perspective of knowing two boys, Dovi and Dan, before getting to know their parents so well. It's an interesting thing to know children before you get to know their parents well. The parsha, you'll take a look, talks a lot about stones. The beginning of the parsha, the middle of the parsha, the end of the parsha talks a lot about stones. A stone in Hebrew is an even, aleph, beis, nun, or avanim, stones in plural. Stone is very strong. Stone is powerful. Stone is supportive. Stone is used to create, to build, to be a place and to be a source of confidence, and a rock, as we call, is a person who's very strong. In the parsha, however, in three different contexts, when we refer to avanim, avanim are used as a sign of peace and as a sign of treaty. The beginning of the parsha, Yaakov wants to sleep on a rock, and all of the rocks, Rashi tells us, want to sleep under Yaakov's head. But all the avanim come together in order to make one strong rock that they will be able to sleep under Yaakov's head. In the middle of the parsha, when Rachel, who Yaakov didn't yet know would be his wife, had a very difficult time removing a rock off of the crater or off of the top of a well, Yaakov comes and removes it for her. And again, that became the sign and insignia of their relationship and building together. At the end of the parsha, when Yaakov and Lavan, his nephew, have difficulties and challenges, it's a stone, it's a rock that's used to make a treaty, to make peace. So although an even, a rock, is something that's sturdy, it's something that's strong, it's something that's powerful, it's something that's supportive, an even, a rock, is also something that represents peace, that represents a treaty, that represents coming together. I think in Howie, I saw somebody who really represented those two elements, which are very, very often difficult to combine. Somebody who's strong, somebody who has an opinion, somebody who has very, very clear, direct ideas of what should be done, how they should be done, how to teach, when to teach, what to teach, how things should be, and what things are important and how they're important, and it's important, and they are important. but how he always had that ability to be able to do that as a gentleman. The one word that comes to mind, I talk about how he's a gentleman. A person who's able to be opinionated, to have strong opinions, to have a strong-minded person, and to really, really know what has to get done and how it has to get done. But to do so in a way that you could be strong as a rock, but also to be able to allow those rocks to come together. Something that's sorely missing amongst many, and something that our generation desires and needs and hopes and prays for. That's the Howie Jacobson that we knew, that Tzvi Hirsch, that was such an important part of our community, it was such an important part of his family. As we see here, everybody comes together. There's one other unique element about a rock. Rock, as I said, is spelled Even, Aleph, Beis, Nun, who is the conjunction of the words Av and Ben, father and son. Even, Aleph, Beis, Nun spells Abba, Aleph, Beis, and Nun is Ben. Knowing Duvi and knowing Dan and getting to know Joel and getting to know Mike, I see that the rock doesn't fall far from the tree. And the ability of the boys to be able to also be opinionated, to be strong-minded, and to have very strong beliefs and strong as a rock, but to be able to be as peaceful and to be able to be supportive and to be able to be the young men and the giant men that they are, is something that speaks of something about their father and of course their mother as well. And there's no question that what I have witnessed the last month or two, seeing a family who lives all over the country and all over the world, to be able to rally together, to come together, to support their father and their mother in an unprecedented way, is a kibbut aveim that I don't know if I've seen the likes of in my lifetime. What you have done for your father, Mike and Joel, what you have done for your father, Duvi and Dan, to travel, to support, to be that rock, to be so supportive for your father, to be supportive for each other, but to be supportive for your mother, who is so grateful, can't stop talking about you, how much you've done for her, is something that is exactly the midah and the characteristic trait that your father represented. The strength of the rock, the sweetness of a rock, and the ability to be able to come together. So we wish, of course, that Hashem should comfort you and your family, the large family and the beautiful family that you have established, Elaine, and the beautiful family and the children, the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren, Kanai Nahar, that continue to follow in the way that you have established, that Howie's established, that you established together as a family, as a couple, in such a beautiful way. Hashem should continue to bless you with so much nachas, with so much bracha, with so much strength, and with the beautiful family that you're surrounded by, to continue to see nachas for dori doros, for generations and generations. Ubila Hashem b'mavas umach Hashem dima me'al kol panim. Hashem should wipe away the tears from all of our eyes. Hashem should wipe away the tears for this tragedy that we're suffering from, and for the tragedy that we're all experiencing in Israel together. And we should be able to come together as a rock, and all the different rocks to be able to come together to strengthen each other as we see, Be'ezrat Hashem, an end to the tzara and to the tzaras that we're all experiencing. I have the opportunity to introduce Rabbi Stephen Exler, who will take over from here. Rabbi Exler is a brother-in-law of Rabbi Dan Jacobson, a very close family friend and rabbi of the family.
Thank you, Rabbi Walter. Thank you for opening your Beit HaKnesset, this full space for this gathering of love, and for making this Beit HaKnesset a spiritual home for Howie and Elaine over this last decade. I want to acknowledge the family members who are here by Zoom, especially from Israel, and all who are here in person, and the greater community of friends and admirers of Howie's and of his children who've come from far and wide today. We extend our love and our wishes of comfort to all of Howie's family, his brothers, Ken and Shai, his children, Mike and Rachel, Dan and Dasi, Joel and Heather, and Davi and Lauren, his grandchildren, Adam and Shayna, Tili and Josh, Roni, Yehuda together with Chayli, Tani, Noam and Elichai, Tamar and Tani, Avital, Sam and Ben, and Jack and Sammy, his great-grandchildren, Itai and Yair, and his life partner and true love, Bobby Elaine. I name each of you because of how deeply loved and precious you each were and are individually to Howie, to Abba, to Sabi. May that always remain with you. We're going to hear words of loving hesped from family, beginning with Howie's son, David Davi Jacobson, sharing both a broader biographical sketch and then personal reflections.
Do Joel a favor. I want to thank all of you for coming today to honor our father with us. I've been given the task to try to give a history of his life in addition to my own remarks, so I apologize in advance if I run a little long. Abba valued concision, which has never been a strength of mine, and I'm not sure I'm going to live up to his standards today, but I can tell you my remarks are shorter than his 2-volume commentary on pseudophyla. Our father, Howard Jacobson, Hesh, Herschel, Howie, and to his kids and grandkids, Abba and Sabi, was born in the Bronx in 1940 to Rabbi David and Jeanette Jacobson. His father, David, who I'm named after, was a pulpit rabbi at Yehuda Halevi and came from a long line of distinguished rabbis going back to the Shlah and the Maharshal. Abba and his brothers Kenny and Shai grew up blocks from Yankee Stadium in the South Bronx, and Abba would often reminisce about the neighborhood and playing stickball. For school, Abba commuted to Manhattan, where he attended Ramaz Lower School and then MTA for high school. He was always an outstanding student, which you'll probably hear a lot. Once he complained to his Gemara teacher that he had only gotten a 98 on an exam. He couldn't understand because he hadn't actually gotten anything wrong. In the episode that he liked to recount, the teacher told him that 99 was reserved for the teacher and 100 was for God only. So 98 was as well as he was going to do. He got 100 on the next test. He did less well in art, where he claimed to have so little natural ability that he got a grade of 0. He admitted to us recently, this is like really recently, like only in the last month or two, that he had his friend do a project for him so he could satisfy his art requirement and graduate high school. This was shockingly out of character. Abba was scrupulously honest. Most stories about Abba are about things like the time that he got audited by the IRS. They found out that he had overpaid, and then he argued with them about it. From MTA, Abba went on to Columbia, where he studied classics with Gilbert Hyatt and others. He graduated at the top of his class while also taking a full course load at JTS at the same time. He realized that he could turn his intellectual passions in Greek and Latin and Judaics into a career. He went to Chicago for a master's, during which time we recently learned that he sent our mom a series of letters urging her to marry him. He then came back to Columbia for a doctorate. His letters to Ima worked. They got married in 1965. My mom explained that what actually did the trick was his readings of the poet Lucretius to her. Abba earned his doctorate in 1967. Then he taught at Columbia in '68 during the protests. At that point, our mom had finished her psychology PhD, and so they moved. My dad took a job in Champaign at University of Illinois. And the reaction was generally from relatives, I think, that they were kind of crazy, moving from New York, where both of their families lived, and there was, obviously huge Jewish communities that they were a part of, to a little college town in the Midwest. The biggest draws for Abba were the quality of the classics department there, and the library, which had like 10 million volumes and was among the best in the world. He had offers from other places, including UCLA, and we often think about how different life would have been if Iman Abba had ended up in Los Angeles instead of Champaign. Parents planned to stay in Champaign for only a few years, until they had kids who were of school age. Mike was born in '69, Dan was born in '71. My parents turned out to really love Champaign, and they changed their plans and they stayed for 47 years or something like that. There was no Jewish day school there. Kosher meat was hard to find. Minions could be very iffy. They had Joel in 1976 and me 7 years later in '83. And Joel always told me I was adopted, but I think that's not true. At which point they were well settled. The year I was born, they bought their house on Greencroft, where I grew up, and they lived for 30 years. My parents were staples at the University of Illinois Hillel, which is the shul that we went to. Abba would lane there every week. He had the Torah pretty much committed to memory. He would look at the Parsha briefly for a few minutes Friday night and then just be ready to lane the next day. I remember walking to shul every Shabbat with him. It was 2 miles on the dot. That was the distance limit that my parents had set for buying a house away from shul. And then they drove it and it was 2 miles on the dot and they said, well, okay. I had to walk extra fast to keep up with him, so we would be at the door at 9:30 a.m. to open up. Abba was pretty much the de facto rabbi of the community. He gave Shabbat Hagadol drashas, he led davening on Yamim Noraim. In terms of us and our Jewish life, Abba would learn with us every night, an hour each. We started in lower school with our mom, learning basic dikduk, vocabulary, chumash, and then we'd graduate to the upper school with Abba, where we would learn Navi, Mishnah, Gemara, and Halacha. We would go through each line carefully, translating as we went. There wasn't room for not paying attention. It was one-on-one. If Abba thought you weren't paying attention, he would test you. He would say the word to me like he'd be in the middle of translating a line, and then he would just insert the words Mickey Mouse, and to see if I reacted. And sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. And sometimes he would actually ask me what he just said, and then I would sort of think for a second, and then repeat it verbatim, and he goes, "Not the tape recorder." There were often snapping fingers, at least for me and for Joel, and I think Mike, and maybe not for Dan. The result was that our Jewish education was sufficient to put us in the highest shiurim when we went off to yeshiva. That was the result of Abba's care, his focus, his learning, his pedagogical skill, and seriousness. My parents took several sabbaticals from Champaign. They went to Israel in 74, 79, and the spring of 83 when I was born. Abba taught at Hebrew U, while my brothers went to Israeli schools. Abba's academic accomplishments were significant. He published 3 books and many articles and notes, some of which were compiled into an anthology. His first book was on Ovid's Heroides. His second was on the Exegog of Ezekiel. It was a translation and commentary of a Greek drama retelling the Exodus story from the Bible. Exegog won the Goodwin Award, which was his field's highest honor. His translation and commentary, his third book, Lab, Pseudophilo, Liber Antiquitatum Biblicarum, took 10 years and was a really huge work that I think cost $500 a book or something, and one of Dan's friends left a 5-star review on Amazon comparing it to Harry Potter. I have distinct memories of Abba typing that book out with 2 index fingers on his Mac Plus. Abba made huge progress on that book during a sabbatical year at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where we lived during Dan's senior year of college, where Ima visited us 10 days a month, and I endured Abba's cooking solo. I remember I never wanted to look at a Brussels sprout for years after that. I remember once he made peas, and I think half of them were frozen and half of them were burnt, and I still to this day don't understand how someone would do that. Lab, Pseudophilo required Abba's vast knowledge of Latin, Greek, and ancient Hebrew, and biblical sources. There aren't many people who are equipped for a project like that. I asked Abba recently, about a month ago, when he was already seriously fading and had very limited awareness, what his favorite academic work of his was, and he said very clearly, Pseudophilo, of course. Ima and Abba moved here 10 years ago. They developed friendships and they found community, and we're so grateful to Rabbi Walter and Rabbi Hertzfeld for welcoming them here and all their friends here who have welcomed them into their community. They were very close to Mike and Rachel, and they got to know Adam and Shana so well. Lauren and I made regular trips here to see them from New York and then Pittsburgh. Bobby and Sabi made numerous longer trips to Seattle and LA and Israel, and even as Sabi's health declined. He just loved to spend time with his grandkids and develop special connections with them. One of his special roles with them was teaching them laning. He taught 8 of them, in addition to the 4 of us, me and my brothers. Roni, Huda, Tani, Adam, Noam, Sam, Shayna, and Ben. And they all did great. Sabi started with Elichai, and he wanted to teach Jack. We started timing with Jack just a few weeks ago when we were visiting Bobby and Sabi. Sabi was a very playful grandfather, sort of in contrast to some of his very serious approach to a lot of things. He would routinely joke around with Jack. Jack's gonna like this one. Jack would tell Sabi to look under something, anything, in an effort to have Sabi respond, "Underwear?" And it worked a lot, to Jack's amusement, but also to Sabi's amusement. My deepest memories of Sabi relate to his incredible dedication to and love and concern for his family. Sometimes his concern was maybe a bit too much for me when I was a teenager. Mike actually, he was all over me. Mike put together, when I got into Columbia, Mike put together fake paperwork from Columbia, which showed up at our house, which showed that Abba had accepted a visiting professorship there for 3 years. And that he was going to be, there was another thing from Columbia Housing, which listed my roommate assignment in RA and then resident scholar Howard Jacobson. And I went apoplectic. Abba's incredible love, care, and dedication were never in question. His time for us all was incredible. It's a model to me. Abba's concern for our well-being, he was making daily lists of everything that he was taking care of for our benefit and that we needed to handle. He wrote up detailed questions for our doctors when he took us to appointments. He followed my academic progress closely, maybe too closely. He, engaging in rich conversations with us about Jewish texts and language and literature and values and the news and our kids and school. His interest in all of us was just profound, and he was so loving and devoted. I want to take just a few moments to express gratitude and appreciation for a few people. First, just in terms of my dad's aid care, Joe Cologne was just incredible as my dad's nighttime aide for the last 2 years, and so supportive of my mom as well. And hospice and other caregivers recently have been invaluable. Mike and family have been so present for Ima and Abba here in DC. Mike, comes to my parents every week, was picking Abba up from shul in a wheelchair and wheeling him home and everything. It's just been so invaluable. And I'm frankly jealous that Mike was with them at times when we were farther away. Dan has been, obviously, Dan came in from Israel here to spend a couple of days with my mom when his son Huda was stationed right outside Gaza, and just massive thanks to him and his family for allowing that to happen. And Joel came twice here with my mom over the last few weeks, just to provide support, and I got to come too, and I just want to thank Lauren for that, for not only being okay with it, but actively pushing me, go, what are you doing here? Go be with your mom, and go be with your dad and spend all the time that you can with them, which is just incredible. Thank you, Lauren. And Ima, yours and Abba's love for each other is just been a huge inspiration, and the care that you gave Abba as he endured sickness and everything is just beyond. I can't, yes. Very blessed to have had Abba. Lauren loved Abba tremendously. Our kids are so lucky to have had him as their Sabi. Abba, Sabi, we love and appreciate you so much, and we will miss you so much.
We'll now hear from Howie's brother from Ken Jacobson, Uncle Ken.
Thank you. So it's, of course, a very sad day for us, but also so much to be thankful for, as Dovey just pointed out in so many impressive ways. I think of a number of words to describe my brother: brilliant, principled, individualistic, stubborn, sometimes to a fault, devoted, family, intellectual, competitive, sometimes to a fault, and loving. Hesh and I grew, to me he was Hesh, until Elaine met him, never heard the word Howie. My parents, he was Herschel, I became Hesh over the years. He must have met Elaine and introduced himself somehow as Howie. We've never heard that in our lives. We grew up together. Our younger brother, Shai, was born 11 years, and one day after Hesh was born, 8.5 years after me. So Hesh and I really grew up together in a small apartment our parents had in the Bronx. We lived in a tiny bedroom with just enough room for 2 beds and a dresser, and we were together so much. But he had so much influence and inspiration for me. Also difficult times. I won't say growing up with him was always easy, especially because it was very competitive nature, but I benefited. So the first area was sports. Our dad was a rabbi, completely non-athletic, thought sports was a waste of time. He thought his wife had given birth to some aliens who became sports obsessed. And it all came from Hesh. Hesh was, say, 2.5 years older than I, so when he was about 7, he started taking, we lived near Yankee Stadium, he started taking up baseball, and then it went to football and basketball and hockey and tennis. And our tiny apartment, we were playing ball all the time to my mother's to disappointment. And we were out there watching and playing and became really a sports family just because of my brother. As I said, I don't think my brother and I ever had even a catch with my father. The notion of my father touching a ball, to him it was all a big waste of time. But this interest in sports, which came strictly from Hesh, has lasted to me to this very day. I'll tell you a brief anecdote. He became editor-in-chief of his high school newspaper at MTA called the Academy News. And during his year as editor-in-chief, at one point he wrote a piece about the basketball team. And he said there's an up-and-coming star coming on the basketball team, a sophomore by the name of Ken Jacobson. And I said, this is my brother writing a praise of me for basketball. It was like one of those moments that I realized that there was true love between us. And not the, of course, he wasn't completely transparent, not indicating the conflict of interest there, but that's a whole another story. So the whole sports issue was simply because of Hesh, who really created it. It was a real blessing. The second area was intellectual. And he early on inspired me with his curiosity, his reading, his interest in so many subjects. But I have to say it wasn't always so easy for me because I rarely lived up to his standards that Dovey put up. He was always at the top of his class. You know, top student, Phi Beta Kappa. I was a good student, but I wasn't a great student. But sometimes it was amusing. We had you mentioned the story about a 98 in the class. I had a Rebbe in high school who had just had Hesh in Gemara like the year before. And I was not that big a Gemara student, but I loved history. And we had an exam on the history of the Talmud. I was very interested in that, and I thought I did well on the test. I get a call at home. My father answers. I said, "Oh, it's your rabbi calling." And I pick up the phone, and I say, "Yes, Rabbi." He says, "Well, what happened to you on the test today?" I said, "Excuse me, what do you mean?" He said, "You only got a 96. And then, of course, I immediately realized he had had my brother for the year before, and my brother always got 100, despite that other rabbi. And I said, "Well, Rabbi, a 96 is a pretty good grade," knowing that after that it was all downhill. So it was always, there was an amusing part of fun. But the truth is, I was never jealous of my brother. I was actually quite proud of him. I knew I could never reach his levels, and I didn't try. But he was something really very proud of. The third area was his individuality. He just, and I admire this, and I wish I was very concerned about what people thought of me. He basically did, especially on important things, the things that he wanted to do and believed in. And of course, the two big moments for that W referred to, one was when he decided to become a classicist. Everybody thought he was a brilliant student. He could become a mathematician, an economist, a lawyer, something. You're becoming a classicist, you know. But he understood it, and the reason he became one of the leaders in this field is because he simply loved it, and it's what he believed in, and it turned out so well. And of course, the second big decision was a decision to go to Champaign. He was offered a position at UCLA, which was a community with a strong Orthodox community, and it was seen what they wanted their family, that was the place to go. But he believed, as Dovey pointed out, in Champaign, and look at the way it turned out. It turned out so beautifully, raising the 4 wonderful sons, and the wonderful life that Hesh and Elaine had there. And again, the amount of time and energy that he invested to educate his children on Jewish matters that Darby talked about was so profound that whenever I go and I mention Champaign, people talk, oh, I heard of your brother and sister-in-law, where you raised 4 Jewish boys there, and what a success it was. And just yesterday, I heard from a former Hillel director there who heard about Hesh's passing, and he said, you know, his contributions to the community and Elaine's were tremendous, and particularly, of course, focused on his laning and balcony every week. So, it was another classic example. Of course, in our family, the decision that we all agreed on, as opposed to some of these others, was his marrying Elaine, which we always referred to as by far the best thing that ever happened in his life, and we still feel that way to the end. The last point I'd want to talk about is his scholarship, and Dovey talked about that too, his writings. He was really a leading scholar. I remember asking him how many people could actually read and review your pseudo-philo. He said there may be 5 people in the world who could do it. Maybe. He wasn't sure they could. Though he pointed out all the different skills and knowledge of classics and Jewish literature and all of that. There were very few people who had that. But I thought of 2 things. One, I would always try to read his books, even though I very often didn't understand them. But the thing that always struck me was how beautifully he wrote. Despite on esoteric subjects, he wrote clearly and in a way that you could read it even if you didn't know. The other thing pointed to his decency. I once asked him, how come you don't go to many more conferences and speak at conferences and review books? And he said to me, sort of understated, but it was really so true about him. He said, well, you know, I try to be honest. And boy, was he an honest person, an authentic person. And if he's reviewing somebody's book and he thinks it's a terrible thing, he's not going to stop himself from saying that. And he said, I don't want to hurt people like that. I don't want to be in a position where, in order to be honest, I sometimes have to damage someone's reputation. So he tried to refrain from doing it, except for one very famous moment, and famous in the narrow circuit of classics, which took place when he was attending a conference a few years ago, and a scholar started attacking the Talmudists from JTS, Shaul Lieberman, who many know was a great scholar at JTS, for saying that Shaul Lieberman did not really know his classics. And Hesh got up there, I heard at that conference, and said, this is a lie. And he then threw a whole speech about trying to prove that Shaul Lieberman, who of course was a classical scholar. So that was one of those rare moments where he felt the need to stand up and speak out. So I'll just finish by saying, as I began, it's a sad day, but I feel like I personally and all of us have so much to be thankful for, and I must say I will miss him terribly.
We're now going to hear from Howie's 2 sons, Mike Jacobson, followed by Joel Jacobson.
I have to lower this a little bit. Brilliant scholar and educator, dedicated husband, father, a brother, grandfather, and great-grandfather. Unparalleled integrity, fierce defender of what he thought was right. Committed Jew and Israel supporter. Advocate for the highest standards and expectations. Immune to pressure of any type. Uninterested in material things, and probably most notably, supervisor of all things at all times. It's hard to capture my dad in just a few phrases, but I think for those here who know him well, those phrases probably ring true. I was very proud to have Abba as my father. Not sure that was always my sentiment during my teenage years, but it certainly has been true for many years. Not just proud of him, but it was easy to be proud as a role model, somebody to watch how they live their life and to try to live your life accordingly. I want to touch on a few of the themes I outlined at the start. The first, and people have talked about this already, was his dedication to family. He was deeply dedicated to us. I wasn't always thrilled as a teenager that Abba was home by 5 p.m. every night, home for the night, and home every weekend. I wish that at points that he had a job as some kind of traveling salesman, but it was because being home with us was absolutely his top priority. And now in retrospect, people have talked about this as well, it's stunning to me the sheer number of hours he spent educating us and running a one-man yeshiva in Champaign, with, again, my mom as the lower school teacher. Since there was no day school in Champaign, he took it upon himself to create and run that yeshiva. We studied with him for an hour every day, each of us separately, Talmud, Mishnah, Torah, and we came out of this as knowledgeable, or maybe even more knowledgeable, than kids who had spent their entire life in Jewish day school. Though my dad would probably say this is actually a reflection of the poor state of Jewish day schools in this country, as opposed to merits about his teaching. And he did this hour with us every day, regardless of how tired he was, what else he had on his plate, or how complaining and annoying we were being. Don't worry, Dan, that wasn't directed at you. And I remember also when I was hit by the Egged bus when I was 13 years old, that he was by my side in the hospital 24/7 as long as I was in there. And although I still question his legal skills, that my settlement from that was a pool pass and a few cab rides to school, I never questioned his dedication to me or our family. He also pushed us, both directly and by watching how he lived his life, to pursue our passions. I don't think any of us felt any pressure to do anything in particular other than to find something meaningful. And for him, he was deeply interested in classics and Judaic studies. I'm not sure that as a combined field existed, but he made it into a combined field and pursued his scholarship there in a way that few others can or could do or have done. And as a scholar, he was both absolutely certain in the merits of his argument and yet very humble. When he won the Top Classics Prize in the field in 1985, I remember the conversation where he swore us to utter secrecy, and I'm not sure I ever heard him talk about winning the award again. He was actually bragged far more about his stickball, the catch he made in stickball when he was a teenager and broke his arm, or his set shot in basketball and how deadly it was. He was also the author of the shortest article in classics history, I think. It was 3 words, a published article. I think it was something like Manat equals Ducat, whatever that means. His editor had pressed him to spell it out. Wasn't an article. How was 3 words an article? And my dad's point was, I've said everything that needs to be said. And after a while, the editor just gave up and published a 3-word article. I'm just sorry that his loss of vision robbed him about a decade ago of his ability to continue his research into retirement. There was nothing more that he liked than spending hours in the classics library in the stacks, doing research and developing new interpretations of ancient texts. And despite the loss of his vision and inability to continue his research, he brought most of his extensive library from Champaign to here when they moved here a decade ago because he was unable to part with his beloved books. Many of them are still in my mom's apartment and in our house, and it's going to be very hard for me to part with them as well. And despite the loss of vision, he trained, as you heard, 8 grandchildren for their bar and bat mitzvahs, including over Zoom. My kids were always baffled when he was able to correct them on the most minor things entirely from memory. My kids would always come home imitating the corrections to me, to each other, just, no, I said ve, not va. And in fact, I think Dovey didn't talk about this, but when Dovey was laning him the parashah, I think about a week ago?
3 weeks ago.
A few weeks ago, when he seemed completely out of it, Dovey thought it would be nice for him to hear the parashah, and he corrected Dovey, woke up to correct Dovey, he said, Vayavrech, not Vayivarech. So even at when he seemed not to be there anymore, it still was somewhere in there. And all the grandchildren saw firsthand through the process just his standards of excellence and his high standards that he always had. And our kids, I know my kids, the other grandchildren, were always trying hard to live up to the standard. And they were so pleased when after their bar and bat mitzvah, Sabi told them they had done a good job, that really meant something to them. They knew that he was not a man of empty praise. In fact, my brothers and I were swapping stories yesterday of the time he had corrected laners in all settings. I remember him making loud corrections of the Chabad rabbi in the DC area and at the Megillah reading at Dan's yeshiva in Israel when the chief rabbi of the old city was in attendance and had stayed quiet. And I remember him up at the bima arguing with the Rosh Yeshiva that the guy needed to go back because he had missed an entire pasuk. Went on his next trip to DC after the Chabad incident. I remember they came, and my dad announced we were going back to the Chabad. And I said, we can't go back there. And he said, why not? I said, well, you corrected the rabbi at every turn on his laning. He said, what did you want me to do? You know how many mistakes he made? So needless to say, when we walked in the door of the Chabad, a year later, the rabbi remembered us well. I think probably had mixed feelings about seeing my dad again. But that was him. He had high standards at all times, and there was no grading on a curve for anyone in any setting. Of course, I'm not sure that I always agreed with every life lesson. He always would tell me that I was exercising too much, and I was close to using up my allotted lifetime amount of exercise. And I remember in high school and summers in college that he would always complain to me about that I was seeing my friends too much. And he said, I don't understand why you need to see them again. You saw them last week. But those lessons maybe didn't resonate with me. But overall, he was a great role model and imparted things that I've tried to impart to my own kids as well. And he and my mom created an amazing home environment, and I'm sure that's why my brothers and I are so close. And there's nothing greater to me than spending time with my brothers. Luckily, all the sisters-in-law have been on board with our brothers' trips. I think we've taken 15 since 2004, with Dan even coming in from Israel for a number of those trips. Of course, it meant now with Dan there, we can't go to Vegas anymore, but that's all right. It is something that is just really, really special. And watching my brothers all spring into action over the last few months has just been amazing, with Joel and Dovey coming in multiple times, just dropping everything, and Dan coming in from Israel in the middle of a war with two of his kids in the army. And it has just been, being here, the one that lives close by, it was just, I felt amazingly supported as well through this period. And watching my parents' marriage, they just hit 58 years, has been something that I've always wanted to emulate. And my mom, as Dovey said, has been an incredible caretaker for my dad over the last few years, just rarely leaving his side, just 24/7, making sure that he had what he needed. And Rachel has already told me that the bar's been set too high, and she's going to fall far short of this. But luckily, she has many other strengths. I didn't marry her for her caretaker skills. And I'm so happy and really thrilled that my parents moved here about a decade ago. It was great to watch my kids grow in relationship with them, the amount of time they got to spend with him and know him, and they really looked up to him and respected him and had fun with him. Just in particular, I remember Shay with her bat mitzvah tutoring, and just you'd hear the continuous laughter and in addition to the seriousness of purpose, and it was just a very special time. We will miss him dearly. One more joke about the microphone. From the time I was about 10 years old, my father would try to get me to lead services at the Hillel in Champaign. As a kid at Zimra, then after my bar mitzvah, Shacharit, Musaf, he tried to get me to lead Mincha on Yom Kippur as I got older. In college, he tried to get me to take Chazanut classes at the YU Bell School of Music. I knew that I was completely uninterested, never would have any interest, so I ignored his oft-repeated encouragement. From the time I was about 12, my father tried to get me to learn about technology. My high school friend Alex learned how to code very early, and my father offered to hire him to teach me. Throughout high school, he wanted me to take classes about computers, software engineering, anything to do with technology. He wanted me to take computer science classes in college. I had no interest, so I again ignored his oft-repeated advice. Punchline is obvious. I've now worked in technology for more than 25 years. I've led services for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur for more than 20 years. My father knew his children sometimes better than we knew ourselves. My father was incredibly involved in each of our lives growing up. He came to our basketball games all over Illinois and would debrief us on the ride home on how we played. Usual analysis: our teammates didn't give us the ball enough, we didn't shoot enough. He took us to doctor's appointment. As Dovey said, he would come with a long handwritten list of questions to ask the doctor. He drove us to all of our appointments, would help edit our papers. When I was in college, he would always call after every basketball game to get the rundown. Even when he wasn't at the game, his feedback was consistent. My teammates probably did not give me the ball enough, and probably did not shoot enough. Although he was highly engaged, it wasn't always in the way that I wanted. I remember starting sub-freshman year at uni, a combined 7th and 8th grade. I had a choice of languages to sign up for, and I picked Latin, since I assumed I could just get my father to work on my homework for me. In retrospect, that was a particularly dumb idea. Instead, he would just try to grill me on grammar and vocabulary. I worked hard to avoid those discussions. I got my first test back from the teacher, who was herself a former student of his. She stood up in front of the class, held up my test with a not impressive grade, and said to the class, "Mr. Jacobson, your father would be ashamed of you." Suffice it to say, I immediately transferred to French. In retrospect, though, she was certainly not right. My father was never ashamed of his kids. Maybe he was sometimes frustrated in the effort that we, or I, would put in, but he loved and cared for us so completely that saying he would be ashamed entirely missed who he was as a father. When I finally developed my prefrontal cortex,
for my kids to make sure they're listening. I learned the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur davening by sitting with my father and having him go through all of it while I recorded him. I probably spent tens or hundreds of hours listening to the recordings over and over to learn it. Now when I lead davening, I can hear my father's voice in my head. Not an idea of it, but I can hear his actual voice singing the Nusach, and it brings me joy. Although I'm so sad to say goodbye to my father, I'm grateful for the time that we had with him. I'm getting close to 50, and I've started to notice how few of my friends and contemporaries leave shul any longer during Yizkor. My father was able to spend so much time with my children who he loved so dearly. They were able to get to know him so well that he was able to dance at Tamar and Tani's wedding. He was able to visit Avital in Baltimore, teach both Ben and Sam their bar mitzvah laning. It was an amazing blessing. I'm also grateful that Heather has known my father for nearly as long as I have. Notwithstanding the time that a 16-year-old Heather showed up at our house in Champaign, darkly tanned from her job as a lifeguard, and my father rebuked her for not putting on enough sunscreen. She cared about him like a father, and he adored her like a daughter. Ima, you and Abba were the best role models for parents in relationships that I can imagine. You regularly point out how Abba was always so appreciative of you and everything that you did. And that's definitely right. What I'm not sure you recognize is what an incredible spouse you were. You've been nothing short of amazing, especially for the last few years as Abba has needed more care. We love you, we love Abba.
We'll now hear from Sabi Howie's granddaughter Tamar, representing the grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
I have had the tremendous privilege of living really close to Bobby and Sabi for the last 5 years. And people, when I first moved, would regularly ask me if I found it difficult to be so far across the country from my family during that time. And I always told them that my grandparents were nearby, and being near them made home and family feel a lot less far away. This only continued to be more true as time went on. During COVID, a time when so many of us felt isolated from family and friends and the entire world, Bobby and Sabi would come over with some Goldberg's bagels and homemade cookies, and we would sit in the courtyard of my apartment building and just chat. I always loved those times sitting and chatting with Sabi. Since I was little, I have truly felt like Sabi was invested in every single thing going on in my life. He would express genuine interest in all of my classes, more so during freshman year when I was taking my humanities rather than my science classes, but he was always happy to sit and learn about all of the new things that I had learned since we last spoke. Even this last month, with one of my visits to Sabi, one of the first things that he asked me was how my new job was going and how I was liking it. In every chapter of my life, I knew that Sabi was thinking about me and truly cared about what was going on in my life. Now I'm speaking on behalf of all of the grandchildren. But the truth is, something that made Sabi so special is that he had a unique relationship with each of us that was filled with so much reciprocal love. For all of us, Sabi was both a great inspirational figure that we all admired so much and looked up to. And at the same time, he was our loving and even goofy Sabi. He was constantly worried about our safety and would chastise us for wrestling on the ground and being late to the airport. And he was also happy to sit down with us and have a long talk about what was going on in our lives and had a dry humor that caught us off guard, but that we really loved so much. Over the last few days, I've had the chance to speak with many of my cousins about each of our unique relationships with Sabi. And I think that piecing them together is really what paints the picture of what made our Sabi so special. Sabi, as we heard already, had an inspiring intellectual pursuit and dedication to his studies that really motivated all of us. Yehuda was telling me that he remembers being blown away as he was sitting with Sabi, and he would give Sabi only the title of his written essays, and Sabi off the bat could recite everything that he had written. Sabi's career in academia was a big part of Adam's inspiration and developing a love of learning and a thirst for knowledge and inspiring him to potentially pursue one himself. Adam was saying how one of his favorite memories was connecting with Sabi over classical music, listening to the Berlin Philharmonic together, and having cello concerts during COVID. Sabi was completely committed to Torah, and what was really special about Sabi is that he had a passion for translating that passion onto his grandkids and his kids. We heard before about Sabi's laning and how he taught that to his grandkids, but it wasn't just the technical skills, it was really so much more than that. Roni was saying how he has really strong positive memories hearing Sabi's laning growing up and then having the privilege of learning to lane from Sabi himself when the time came. He spoke about how well and patiently Sabi taught him and that he never failed to do so without his unique humor. Shay also spoke beautifully last night about her time learning to lane with Sabi. So that growing up, she had always seen other people lane and knew that that was something that she wanted to do. And when Adam was laning, was excited to be able to do that herself. And when she got the opportunity to begin to do so with Sabi, when preparing for her bat mitzvah, she was always impressed that even when Sabi's eyesight started to leave us and he couldn't see the text himself, he was still so particular and was able to correct on the smallest details. Shay's bat mitzvah was actually postponed for a year because of the pandemic, which is something that potentially could have been very difficult, but she said it was really an opportunity to learn more with Sabi, and it was such a positive experience for her. Sabi also had this wit and dry humor that we all loved so much. Huda was telling me about a time that he was training for a 5K, and Sabi deadpan, he said, "Why aren't you running a marathon?" And that's my specialty. Roni also used to drive Sabi completely nuts by sending him emojis into the chat of their weekly Zoom, and Sabi would grumble about it, saying, "What are these things?" Sabi, as we heard before, loved his family deeply, especially his grandkids, and spent so much time investing in each of those personal relationships. Jack remembers Sabi reading Goldilocks to him when he was little, and how eventually the roles reversed, and Sabi would love as Jack started reading books to him as he started to grow up. Even Sabi's newest grandkid, Ollie, our chocolate lab, developed fond memories with Sabi, something I'm told no one could have predicted given Sabi's historic extreme dislike for dogs. And yet, we were looking at our wedding pictures last month, and Sabi was concerned that Ollie, his other grandkid, was missing from the pictures. Family meant everything to Sabi, and once Ollie was considered family, he was treated like family. Sabi also had this childlike attitude that I think was specifically reserved for his grandkids. Tani, my husband, was just telling me about his first time meeting Sabi, when Bobby and Sabi came over to my apartment during college and brought lunch, and we were just hanging out. As Tani was chatting with Bobby, he saw me passing fries to Sabi under the table, and Sabi would sneak them in his mouth while Bobby wasn't looking. Loving his family, inspiring intellectual pursuit that we all hope to emulate, Torah learning, humor, these are all pieces of the puzzle of what made our Sabi so, so special. In the weeks leading up to our wedding this past summer, Tani and I found ourselves reflecting on how lucky we were to have all of our grandparents at the wedding. During that time leading up, there were things that you stress about, flower arrangements and music, and something that really kept us grounded during that time was knowing that Sabi was going to be at the wedding, and it really would not have been the same without him walking down the aisle, without him saying Sheva Brachot, without him dancing with Bobby and his kids and his grandkids, and that was just, it's something that we were thankful for in the moment, and reflecting on it, I can't begin to express how thankful I am for that. I feel very lucky to have had 22 years of my life with Sabi in it, to have had time living so close by that I can spend with the two of you, and to have danced with him at my wedding. We will all miss you so much, Sabi, and you are so very loved.
Thank you to each of you for your words. You captured the truly consistent and deepest features of Howie because he was truly so consistent and so deep. I want to offer a few thoughts after which my parents-in-law, Howie's longtime mechutanim, will introduce and recite a concluding parak of Tehillim, and then Joel, Howie's nusach will close with the El Malei Rachamim. In honoring Howie's memory, thinking about this man whose love of knowledge was matched only by his love of family, this man whose unflinching high standards, combined with his humble demeanor, continually managed not to demoralize his students, but to truly inspire them to work harder and grow more, the hallmark of an outstanding educator. In honoring his memory, I opened up Sefer Mishlei, our biblical work which is an ode to knowledge. What better way to honor this lifelong learner than to learn something in his honor? Mishlei reads like a tribute to Howard Jacobson. This book of Tanakh, which is all about the way in which chokhmah, true knowledge, learning and understanding, is the cornerstone and the key to everything. Knowledge ought to cultivate a sense of fairness and justice. It should drive one to chesed and loving kindness. It deepens humility, and the pursuit of it should engender yirat Hashem, a God-fearing persona. All of this, was completely Howie Jacobson. One particular pasuk, chapter 2, verse 10, emblematic of the whole ethos of Sefer Mishlei, rang true to me as a motto of our precious family member and community member Howie Jacobson's life. Ki tavo chokhmah v'libecha, trying to read it precisely correctly, v'da'at lenafshecha yin'am. For wisdom will penetrate your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Knowledge entered Howie's heart. First of all, he learned things deeply, and they stayed with him. Not just classics, but classical music, history, Torah, whatever he learned. And all the anecdotes about his correcting laning from memory attest to this too. It stayed with him. This was true of his classics knowledge, his professional excellence as well. He learned deeply. He made profoundly meaningful contributions to his field, and his scholarship was highly regarded by the best and the brightest. Of course, as a chacham, he lived out the dictum of Pirkei Avot, Ezehu chacham halomed mikol adam. The one who is truly wise is the one who learns from every person. And so he engaged not just books and teachers and students, but his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, always with a loving curiosity about what you were learning, taking you and your points of view seriously from a young age. Howie's love of learning, as the Malbim explains this pasuk, made him not just a chacham, but a chacham leiv. He was endowed with a wise heart. It's what enabled him to see the kindness of those in his orbit and appreciate it. Howie was a lifelong practitioner of gratitude. I loved how you, Bobby Elaine, described the way he thanked hospital staff when he could barely speak any longer, even when they were poking and prodding him, still thanking each one for their loving care, tending to him. And thanking you, Bobby Elaine, for virtually every meal. There were a lot of meals. Every kindness in your relationship. And he had so much to be thankful for in you, not just the meals, the lifelong partnership in every aspect of life, holding hands through it all, the tireless care, especially over these last years and last months that you showed him, reading to him, strolling with him, ensuring that his every need was met with dignity and love. Now that he can no longer verbally express his thanks to you, we all thank you. Howie's wise heart enabled him not to be particularly concerned with material things. In fact, he was a sharp critic of materialism. He saw things for their function and used them until they wore out, whether clothes or cars. Many of us could learn a little more from him in this regard. But don't think that his little concern for clothes meant he didn't have great taste in clothes. He was Bobby Elaine's most trusted consultant in clothes shopping, even though it surprised you over and over. He had a wonderful aesthetic sense. The Chacham Leiv is the term used in the Torah for those who built the Mishkan. How we built an incredible Mishkan. a sacred and holy home that was in equal parts family, yeshiva, synagogue skills training center. And he did it not single-handedly, but double-handedly together with you, Elaine. All of us marvel at the family you built. Typically, that depends on community. You were the community. As the second half of the pasuk says, Da'at lenafshecha yin'am. Knowledge should somehow implant in us a pleasantness. Howie had pleasantness. He had a dry and delightful sense of humor in well-crafted and timely delivered one-liners that especially worked because of how serious he was most of the time. Like when a high school friend of Joel's asked Howie how he could possibly be the father of someone so very big and tall. And Howie replied, I used to be 6'6". The friend practically believed him. Howie was truly na'im, truly pleasant. He was an active and loving father in an age where that was less common. Not just the doctor appointments, but bath time and balloon tackle football. Still have to figure out how to play that. Even if quieter, he engaged deeply and was wonderful to be with. I always felt his pleasantness and his interest and kindness when we spent time together. Most of all, I felt his incredible pride in his boys, their wives, and in his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The speaker in Mishlei addresses most of the first 10 chapters of the book to Bini, my son. Many of the psukim following that address sound similar, but there are nuanced differences. This was Howie. His prime directives in life were to you four, his sons, but each message was crafted to fit you as individuals, whether in formal learning or the formative conversations you had about life and career over many decades. And you each live out his values in different ways. And each of you is endowed with the wise-heartedness that was his hallmark, and are passing that on to your children and grandchildren in the most beautiful ways. And you shared it back with him in all the attention and care and special times you prioritized having with him as you built your families and in these final weeks. Mishlei, which begins with those instructions to Bini, ends with the words we will sing around our tables this Friday night, Eshet Chayo. This was Howie's life, his words to his sons, his belonging to a band of brothers as he grew, and creating a band of brothers as a father, and his deeply loving lifelong partnership with his Eshet Chayo. In closing, I love the custom that the four of you related to me, that typically when getting ready to leave Champaign, Abba would ask you what you had in your wallet. The wise ones would say, I'm broke, and he would send you on your way with more cash than you could possibly really need for whatever the trip ahead was. We're taking our leave, physically, of Howard Jacobson now. But his brothers, his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, his wife, his friends, his students, his rabbis, and many of them sent their tributes who couldn't be here today. We are all leaving the opposite of empty-handed. We are endowed with a lifetime of lessons, gifts, memories, and values, cultivated by Howie's wisdom to keep cashing in his memory, in his honor, and in his merit. Yehi zichro baruch. May Howie Jacobs' memory be a source of blessing for all of us. This time I want to invite my parents-in-law to come forward, Rebbitzin Rookie Billet and Rabbi Heshi Billet, the Rabbi Emeritus of the Young Israel of Woodmere, to introduce with a few words and then recite Tehillim Perek Aleph, a psalm deeply fitting of who Howie was.
I'm not a good editor, so I'm just going to read what I had written to Dan and Dasi when I heard of Howie's passing, and I hope it's not repetitious. We knew Howie Jacobson, our beloved Mechutan, for 29 years and counting. He was a very good man, an amazing husband, a great father, a talented professor and thinker, an articulate writer, a great Torah reader and a leader of the prayer service. He was humble, and I did want to add that never in his life did I hear him use the honorific doctor. I remember the invitations that we sent for the wedding, Howard and Elaine Jacobson, and we followed suit with Renee and Herschel, or whatever we did in the time. He was genuine, he was loving, a man with a dry sense of humor when he wanted to be funny. He was totally sincere about everything he did and said. He was a lover of Judaism and Jewish life. He merited having an outstanding life partner and woman in your mom, who stood at his side through thick and thin, no matter what. Always wise, always loving, an outstanding wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother. Together they believed in Chanoch Lanar Al Pi Darko, raising each child in his particular way, and they raised 4 sons of excellent character, in whom they instilled a very strong value of family loyalty, as you've heard, and the highest standards of kindness and goodness, as well as an amazing work ethic, despite what you've heard, even-temperedness, patience, and sincerity. It is a joy to see those 4 boys together, laughing and horsing around and being serious when they should be. Howie and Elaine's romance was a beautiful love story that lasted a lifetime. Elaine's devotion, especially these last years, knew no bounds. Her caregiving, her reading, her walking, each of the boys did their parts in giving their parents great joy, nachat, appropriate pleasure, emotional and physical support and assistance as needed. To have such children is truly a gift, and their daughters-in-law were all totally devoted, like biological daughters. I would also mention that they had incredible relationships with all of their mechutanim, all of their children's in-laws, which is also not something that is muvan me'elav, understood. Grief and sorrow are always a natural part of loss. But as was said, in this case, in the midst of the grief is the celebration of a life lived so well, lovingly, ethically, and devotedly. We will always remember Howie with deep fondness, with admiration, and with great love. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
I was a synagogue rabbi for many years, and I officiated at many funerals. And one of the things that irked me was when a rabbi was called to read a chapter of Tehillim, and instead made a speech first and then read a chapter. So I've been asked to read a chapter of Tehillim, but I have one comment to make. I am an only child, and I was often asked, did you have any remark to tell your parents about being an only child? And my remark always was, if you were to have only one child, it should have been a girl. But as you heard today, 4 boys of this caliber, it's not bad if you were to have only males. They can do the job well. Okay, now I'll read my chapter of Tehillim. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach ba'atzas rishayim, u'v'derech ha'toim lo amad, u'v'moshav leitzim lo yashav. Ki im b'tzoras Adonai chefzo, u'v'soraso ye'egeh yomam v'layla. V'haya ke'etz shasul al palgei mayim, asher piryo yitain b'ito, v'yolehu lo yibol, v'chol asher ya'aseh yatzliach. Lo chen ha'rishayim, ki im kamotz asher tidefenu ruach, al ken lo yokumu rishayim ba'mishpat, v'chata'im ba'adas tzadikim, ki yodei Adonai derech tzadikim v'derech rishayim toved. And I sincerely hope, Howie, that I got all my middle L's and middle R's correct.
In a moment, I'll ask you to rise. Joel asked me to step in for the Al Malei Rachamim. Levaya and burial will follow on Monday morning at Eretz HaChaim, with the final time to be announced, and we'll share that information as we have it. Shiva will be observed, I'll just suffice by saying, in various places by various relatives. Please be in contact with any of our communities or branches of the family for information about how we can continue to show up for them in the days and weeks, months and years ahead. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein B'Meromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei HaShechina, B'Ma'alot Kedoshim U'Tehorim, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירי את נשמת צבי הרש בן הרב דוד משה וצ'רנה שהלך לעולמו, בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמתו. בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו. וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for being here. Shabbat Shalom in Israel. May it truly be a Shabbat Shel Shalom for all of us.
So I graduated